doing introductions. If you are not on the panel, I would ask that you keep your video off. We will have time at the end for questions. So right now during the presentations, we will have the chat button muted until the end. So I'll start with introductions of our panelists. And also before I start, I just want to thank you for being here today. We did have one panelist who is unfortunately ill today, but we will still be able to move forward with 3 and I think have a very great discussion. So before we get started, I just want to again welcome our panelists. And for those who are joining, if you are not on the panel, if you could please mute your video or take yourself off video so we only have our panelists on video. I would like to start off by first introducing Lautauscha Davis. Lautauscha Davis is an accomplished administrator in education with experience that spans across the K-12 sector, community college, and at the university level. She speaks of trauma in her personal life as a mother and educational professional, having completed a doctorate degree in leadership and a master's degree in social work from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. In various sectors, Dr. Davis shares a wide perspective on Black trauma with institutions of higher education and through learning. I would like to next welcome our panelist, Katie Huskey. Katie is a licensed clinical social worker and owner of Purpose Lotus Counseling, graduated from UW Oshkosh with both her bachelor's and master's degree in social work. She has dedicated her career to working with adults who have lived through various types of trauma. When she created Purple Lotus Counseling in 2018, her aim was to create a safe, affirming, and educated space for marginalized populations. With a focus on addressing their unique needs, she continues to strive to make a difference in her clients' lives and within the community. Lastly, I would like to welcome our panelist, Shannon Smith. Shannon Smith is a clinician network member for the Anti-Drug Player Assistance Program for the NBA and the NBA Players Association, treating athletes with alcohol and drug addiction. He is also a licensed professional counselor with SLS Counseling Group, LLC, specializing in providing high-quality behavioral and mental health services. He is committed to building self-esteem, improving decision-making, and developing appropriate coping skills to youth and adults in the community. He has an extensive background working with pro athletes, youth, and many other demographics. He uses his high sought-after expertise in behavioral health in conjunction with mental health to provide exceptional services. He focuses on individual and group therapy that ranges from academic underachievement and substance abuse. Mr. Smith is a former high school state basketball champion, nationally ranked basketball recruit that went on to play major D1 basketball and to play in the NBA. A proud University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee alumnus, he received his Master's of Science in Educational Psychology in 2001. He was also elected to the UWM Hall of Fame in 2001. Mr. Smith's credentials include clinical substance abuse counseling, substance abuse professional, certified addiction specialist, master addiction counselor, certified marijuana addiction treatment specialist, and board certified post-traumatic stress disorder clinician. He is a member of the American Psychotherapy Association and the American Counseling Association. So thank you again to our 3 panelists. Before we get started, I'd like to just introduce myself. My name is Dr. Damira Grady, and I am the Associate Vice Chancellor of Academic Support of Inclusive Excellence and the Chief Diversity Officer at UW Oshkosh. My division is hosting this panel today because we felt this is an important topic for us to discuss during Black History Month. Before we dive into the questions, I do want to acknowledge just the often unrecognized burden of talking about your personal trauma when you are a Black or African-American person. And I want you 3 to know that I don't take my responsibility to guide you through this discussion lightly. There will be topics that we discuss today that I'm sure will be traumatizing to you. So at any point, you need to pass the question or lean on me to further explain something, please do that. Know I am here to support you. And I thank you for being willing to not only share your expertise, but to share possibly your own trauma through some of the discussions we will have. So with that said, I will open the space because we invite people into our space sometime and we don't give them space to share anything that's on their mind, and they leave wishing they would have shared something. So before we start the question, is there anybody on the panel that would like to add anything further to their introduction?
Hold on, just making sure. All right, can you hear me, Dr. Grady?
Nope.
Can you hear me now? You should be able to hear me now. All right, thank you so much. Well, I wanted to say first, thank you, Dr. Grady, for this invitation today to speak with the folks that have decided to join us here today. I am often invited to panels to have discussions of this flavor. And so definitely Black trauma is something I've experienced, as with, I'm sure, the other panelists and folks in the audience today. So I thank you for this opportunity to share in a diverse perspective, as all of us have still experienced Black trauma in a very different way. And so I hope today's experience helps me see things from a different perspective, and I hope it would be beneficial to others to recognize trauma and our role in helping to mitigate some of the damage that we do to students abroad. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we will get started with the question. So I will give you our first question, Shannon, if you don't mind. Can you explain your reaction, emotion, feelings, and thoughts when you hear the phrase Black trauma for profit?
Yes, well, good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Actually, when I think about, the actual question, it had to bring me to the understanding that this was something that could be systematically taken advantage of. It was something that I wasn't thinking of when I saw the images every single day. So when I read the articles, I was unaware of the profit that was occurring with the jewelry. I watch a lot of sports, ESPN. Of course, we were able to see the NBA last year participate in the bubble, but also participate in a lot of the social activism and putting things on the court, allowing players to wear things on their jerseys, allowing organizations to put forth images and statements of support, and not realizing that that was also part of a profitable exchange. When I see going into gas stations or during the civil unrest, a lot of people who were posted up selling buttons and T-shirts and pins supporting the Black Lives Matter movement or any other social activism that was going on, and they weren't people of color. Those were images that kind of stood out to me that were very surprising, and I had to take a step back and understand that this is not actually people who were being allies, or people that were more opportunists. So when I think about how it has affected me, it has actually enlightened and encouraged me to delve further into other situations or entities that are actually profiting from this unfortunate situation. So it's been awakening for me. It's been very disappointing to see, but I think as more eyes are on these things that are occurring, I think it's going to find themselves dissipated and you'll see a lot less of it. But it's very unheartening and very disappointing to see.
Thank you. Katie, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Great. Yeah, I did have some thoughts. I think the first thing that sort of came up for me was what's new, honestly, in terms of profiting from Black trauma. Our nation is really built on profiting from Black trauma. It's a common thread that's woven into the fabric of our nation, and so I think things haven't changed. I think we've some people think about how slavery's been abolished and so things have so improved, and yet this idea of profiting still is woven in there. If we think about, say, media or movies, and how we see movies that depict really graphic things that have happened. We look at movies that depict slavery and the beatings and rapings of African Americans. And the people who are making these movies are not people of color, and they're profiting immensely from this trauma. I appreciate what Mr. Smith had to say about the selling of merch during protests. It's something that I hadn't really thought about either until I started kind of breaking down this topic a little bit more. But I saw it frequently at protests, and it's disheartening. It's disheartening, but I also have this feeling of what's new.
Thank you for that. I would ask Jacqueline, can you turn off your camera, please? Jacqueline, Jacqueline, can you turn off your camera? Tasha, do you have any thoughts to that question?
Absolutely. So I was thinking about trauma. I think a lot of times when we discuss trauma, I think it's important for us to frame trauma in such a way that, when I think of trauma, I think of something traumatic, something that has affected someone on a large scale. And so I think it would be important for us today to frame trauma in a way that really describes trauma as being a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. So when I say that to mean that we're not talking about violence or trauma to the fact of the sensationalized trauma of Black people, such as the Floyd case and things of that sort, or the Emmett Till. I think some of the Black trauma we're describing today is really about the trauma we experience day to day in wearing our Black color and wearing our women pointage. So for us, I really want to make sure we frame trauma in a way that is not the sensationalized trauma. It's the trauma of every day that we're experiencing. And certainly those kind of discussions in this platform help us to be more sensitive to how it affects us and how it affects others. And certainly when we think about when white people profit off of Black, one author I want to give credit to, Zeba Blay, wrote a story, and it's about that explicitly. It talks about when white people profit off Black trauma. And so she or he, I'm not sure which, makes reference to paintings and things of that sort that have been in the industry and people have made millions and millions of dollars off of, and how that money is not fueled back into the African American community. And so I believe that is seriously a problem here in America and around the world at large. And then too, there's things that happen on college campuses, there's things that happen in our community. So as we think about trauma, we want to just make sure we're framing it around all of those experiences as being those that help separate us from our counterparts, and that great work we can do today to kind of level the playing field, or at least advise others on how it affects our communities.
Each of you said something that stands out to me. You talked about the incidents that have happened over the last year and your personal feelings around seeing images, sometimes projected, but then also sometimes either co-opted or appear performative by some of your allies. And we have a question later on that will dive into that, but I want to hear more about, before we move on, if there's anybody that wants to expand on just that personal feeling for yourself, but also for maybe your family or people you work with, what that has felt like. And we can keep it local through the last year, but what has that felt through the pandemic and the emerging of more images around Black trauma?
Well, I can chime in on that. One of the most recent things, along that path is, the rebranding that Uncle Ben's and Aunt Jemima is going through right now. That is something that as a community, we have been able to pinpoint as inappropriate and hurtful, but it hasn't been until, over the last couple of years of the social unrest and the education of our younger people that have made a space to speak out against these things that are occurring and saying, hey, this is not appropriate any longer. This is not something we're going to stand for. And more ears and more eyes have become present on these particular companies and brands. And now they're forced to make changes because their bottom line is going to be affected. So, you know, when I see that these things are slowly happening, it's letting me know that there is a resurgence of awareness that is starting to kind of snowball into making some changes, you know, that are going to be long-standing and things that should have occurred a long time ago. And back on, you know, the traumatic experiences of those individuals that are on these boxes and that are on these labels that originated from Black pain and Black traumatic experience on a consistent and daily basis for decades. So to see that that is occurring has been a little bit of a uplifting change for me. But I know that there's not a lot more that needs to be done. But to see that we are being acknowledged and there are going to be changes made is definitely a positive.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that? Or on question 1 in general before we move on? Okay, thank you. So second question, I'm going to start with you, Lautauscha. Racism impacts Black employees and students emotionally, mentally, and physically. Can you provide an example that would help an ally understand this experience?
So I think that, hold on, let me just turn this up a little bit here. All right. Is that better? Can you hear me better? Okay. So I think that for, that's a loaded question, Dr. Grady. But of course, within that question, I'm thinking about things from an employment perspective. As a person, as you shared in the bio, I've had a lot of experience working in institutions of higher learning. And I think that in those various roles, as a Black woman, I have experienced a lot of trauma. Some of us have learned these new words to kind of label that trauma. Maybe we've learned about microaggressions, and maybe we've learned about other terms that help us label the experience that a lot of us carry just by default. And so when I'm thinking about my employability and thinking about the role that I play, I tend to work in sectors that serves underserved communities. And I'm oftentimes labeled as a person as what I've heard called like the Black Moses, right? When you're African American and you work for underserved population, people identify the work you do as being so dear to your heart. And while it is very much so, especially the populations for which I serve now, I still believe that that's a lot of weight to carry. In K-12 sectors where I was one of very few African Americans on our executive team. And so, of course, when things like Black History Month go, everybody looks to me as though, like, what are we going to do for Black History Month? As though it's my unique experience that allows me to be the expert on Black History Month and that no other person shared in the responsibility for those things. And so I have learned over time how to those experiences. And again, it goes back to trauma. Just going to work daily and knowing that those kind of things still happen in the workplace creates some trauma for me and for many of colleagues in the same situation. So I tend to work really hard to work with individuals at executive levels, individuals that report to me, individuals at the lateral move. I work really hard to help people dissect what that really means in the workplace so that I can have a regular 9-to-5 job the way my counterparts do and go home not stressed about things that have happened that day. So another example I think is similar to how, you know, the college campuses all have these sit teams or teams where students' experiences or behavior are being dissected because perhaps students haven't done the right thing, right? And so whenever there is a person of color or a minority person, I almost have to take the floor and defend the person. And I didn't realize for a long time that that's what I have been positioned to do, that I somehow feel that I have to have the voice for all minorities. And again, if you think about the definition of trauma, that's a traumatic experience to have to feel every day. And so I just think that there's things that come with being a Black that just creates such a stressful situation And so for me, I'm just always trying to help educate others, to help teach and help be a role model for exactly how do we, how do we deal with that in a workplace in a way that's respectful, a way that's still professional, and in a way that kind of leaves other people with an impression on how they should move forward with understanding trauma and understanding that it's not any one person's responsibility to behave in such a way or to reflect all the needs of a whole entire group of people. So for me, it's been a challenge. Even now, I'm a little nervous, just thinking about some of my colleagues that might be joining us today and just thinking about some of my experiences and just knowing that it is a lot of work to be Black. It's a lot of work to be a Black woman. It's a lot of work to be a Black woman in higher ed. And it's seemingly that it's part of why I'm looking forward to retirement, counting the years. I'm not as close as I'd like to be, but I'm certainly making those phone calls to figure out how much longer I have to go. But as it relates to people here and on this call, it's just really important for us to recognize that it's not one person's responsibility. When I got here today, I didn't know the other panelists, and I'd be curious to see if there were some white people who could speak as well about Black trauma, right? We know that we know the experience, but really when we're winning is when other people know our experience and can really have the empathy at the level that we need them to have to recognize how it impacts us so that our behavior is better understood by others. So I would have liked to have seen that. I think in the next panels to come up, I challenge you, Dr. Grady, to kind of invite those and get a really diverse perspective on it from the sense of that, I like to hear what other people had to say about that.
I guess I'll follow up what Lautauscha said. I think she spoke eloquently on that experience. Whenever there is an occurrence, for example, an unarmed Black citizen that's harmed or killed by the police, I'm automatically on defense because I know at some point in my day, I'm going to have to explain or defend, and most times it's defend. And it causes me to become educated on the particular instance, and that has to do with whatever's been presented on the media and whatever has been disseminated in the press to be equipped to answer some of the questions or the false statements or narratives that people come in with, whether it's on the job or interacting in practice when you're dealing with clients and the questions that they have. And one of the things I've noticed is whenever I do have to defend, and that's how I feel like I do have to defend because those people look like me, and I have to feel their pain and their family's pain immediately, and that's what people don't understand. But when there's certain statements made once something happens, for example, that there was marijuana in someone's system. As an addictions therapist and alcohol and drug counselor, I know that 30 days marijuana can last into your system. So something that could possibly have been ingested 20 days ago can be in someone's system at the time of their demise. And how that is being utilized as an excuse for what has just occurred is something that I have to be ready to defend because people don't understand. And they automatically think that this person must have been doing this 10 seconds before this situation occurred, and that this is probably why this situation escalated to that point. So I'm having to, utilize my experience and knowledge in what actually drugs do or how long they stay in your system to even present the possibility that someone is innocent until proven guilty, but all of these other factors that the media has put at the forefront of this story is irrelevant. So that's one of the things that I can say that I experience when it comes to, understanding this experience and educating others.
Thank you.
Yeah, something that comes to mind for me is that Black employees and students sort of do the emotional labor of diversity and inclusion work. So my background, most of my background until I started in private practice, had to I worked in institutions of higher learning. And so within these institutions, diversity and inclusion institutions get sort of a pat on the back for having diversity and inclusion and showing up in this way. And a lot of times I feel like it's like a sticker they get to wear that says like, look at all the hard work we're doing. And yet this hard work is really more on the backs of Black employees and students who show up to do this work are expected to be experts in this topic. They're expected to do the teaching and to pull the work, to pull the weight of this work. And yet then when traumatic things happen within our communities, like what we've seen earlier last year, these same Black employees and students' needs are ignored. They're expected to temper their grief and their frustration and their anger when they show up at work, or they're just expected to show up at work like nothing's happened. And you're not allowed to use sick time or to use personal time for your own grief of your community, or it's not understood why you would need to take time. I worked with several students where professors were like, absolutely not. You are to show up, and this isn't an excused absence sort of thing, which I think is just tragic. And yet they're expected to carry all of this weight. So yeah, that's something that comes to mind.
And to expound upon that, what people have a hard time grasping is, athletes are employees, just as all of us on this panel and listening to this commentary. When we see something on the news, we automatically get a disposition, and we have to go out and face the day. We have to go in front of coworkers. We have to go to the store. We have to engage with people. Athletes are no different. So when they say that they don't want to play or they're going to contemplate not taking the field, they're no different than us. They are affected by what they just saw, and understanding that the people that are going to come to see them perform have no cares whatsoever. They want them to go up there and perform at their highest level of their ability and entertain them for the hour and a half or 2 hours. And when you are faced with these type of images, when you're faced with these type of continual, atrocities that happen, it affects you. It can affect your play. It can affect your mindset. You can't perform. I know that when I see things and I have to go in and provide counseling for people, I have to take a step back and make sure that I'm okay before I even provide any type of counsel or any type of advice during that time period, because what I saw just affected me as well. So when people say they have issues with athletes or people in the performance field with saying we don't want to play, it's not a power play all the time. It is truly a time to reflect, just as everyone else gets that opportunity. And just because you make a certain kind of money or you have a certain type of stature, we're absolving ourselves from that. That's just absolutely wrong, and it's absolutely foolish. So, that's another part of the traumatic experience, that I am at a certain stature, but I can't express it because of who I am.
Yes, absolutely. That's been my experience too as a therapist. This last year has been incredibly difficult to be a Black woman and experience the things that our community has experienced alongside my clients. Have to show up in that space for them when I am grieving and struggling with my own things. I had family members who were out in Minnesota who were injured in some of the things that were happening this summer, and having to show up with my clients is increasingly difficult. And the pandemic in and of itself, and kind of being a therapist through all of the things that have been going on in our community and as in the world has been challenging.
Thank you for that. Just to dig into this question a little bit more, I heard a couple things. Well, I heard a lot of things that stand out for me, but there's an intersection that I want to dive into with you, if you allow me, and that's this notion of emotional labor around Black trauma, profiting off Black trauma, and working through that with our allies. So to Tasha's point earlier, how do we create spaces where our allies are educated enough on our Black trauma that they share in that emotional labor to educate other people without profiting off of it? So just any thoughts you might have on that, or should we create that space? And if so, what does it need to look like? So how do you create that shared space to share the emotional labor to teach people about Black trauma? Who should do that and what should it look like?
I'll say I think we share in the responsibility, and unfortunately, us as Black Americans and people of color have always had to take the lead and be the spearheads of that dissemination of education, and we get tired of that as well. And I'm hoping that other entities recognize that if you are having employees that have diverse backgrounds, that you can also be a leader in educating yourself to make sure you're creating a space for all people to feel comfortable and to feel understood and feel heard and listened to. And I think one of the most important things that I'm seeing during this whole time period is people listening to respond, and they're not listening to learn. They're quick to defend a situation or say, well, what about this? Or why did this person do this? Or why couldn't you just listen? When you have a different cultural experience, we respond differently to stimuli, and our response is different than your response. So we're not going to have the same result. So I think with most people that we encounter, we have to just see if they're listening to understand or they're just listening to respond. And I encourage, all people who want to be allies to have a listening ear and a compassionate heart, because we generally don't want to have an issue. We want to be left alone. And if we can't have that, at least listen to what we're saying and don't try to discount or minimize what we're saying our personal experience is.
I'll go next. And I wanted to piggyback off of Shannon's idea there too. I know that it's a challenge for all of us, but I concur with that thought that it's not one individual's person's or individual race to educate everybody about it. It's almost synonymous with the thought that, it's not any one person's responsibility to do that. So when I think about, for me, I get a little tense and stressed even thinking about that daily. I have to feel that in the workplace. And so I think about how we as institutions have to be more thoughtful. I know I've seen a surge in the last year or two about diversity and equity and inclusive directors and associate vice chancellors, something like your role there, Dr. Grady at UW Oshkosh. I've seen a surgence of those types of roles at various institutions. And so I'm seeing a commitment, I believe, at a different level in order to charge institutions with ensuring that, to the degree possible, that there is some work being done around diversity, some work being done around training. I know we hear the word training very often, and I'm the first one to say that I don't like trainings. I know that it's a place where we start, right? We got to start with some structured way of educating people, but we can't stop there. It's not enough to host trainings and a few workshops and to think we've done our job with diversifying the workplace and making it a diverse situation for students. It's not enough for us to hire 2 or 3 Black individuals on the panel of 12 and consider ourselves to be diverse institutions in that way, because representation is not the number one way you diversify the thought processes that guide colleges and schools districts and schools themselves. And so when we think about the number of people we have that are of color that serve on things, that's not enough. The training we do, where we go and we listen to people talk and we always have great stories and we're asked some questions at the end, that's not enough. So we have to challenge ourselves and institutions within that hierarchy and in that infrastructure to be sure that at every juncture where we can, that we're looking at ways to diversify thinking. And that goes beyond the Black and white issue, right? When I think of diversity, many of us go straight to the Black and white issue. I think of the differences in men and women in particular roles. When they did some studies about chancellors, they found that there's a larger number of folks that are, men that represent the chancellor roles as opposed to others, and things of that sort. And so it's not a black and white issue. It's diversity as it relates to religion, as it relates to, people's personal and preferences. And so on college campuses, you'll see different groups. You'll see the Black community group, or you'll see the Hispanic community group. And so definitely those serve a basis for people to feel belonged, right? So students want to feel like they belong. Those are great. But do we stop there? Do we simply open up an office and call it the Black office, where students can come and maybe listen to music that's more indicative of their culture? But what are we doing to pose those offices or to position them in a place where they're offering more to students? Are we really teaching students how to do those political, what's it called, when they are out, when they're rebelling, or when they want to talk about things? Are we teaching them, how do you talk about stressful things in a respectful way? How do you advocate for yourself in a way that doesn't come off as being destructive or being aggressive or assertive? So there's things that we have to do as institutions where we don't stop at simply hiring a few people of color or simply opening the doors of an African American community center. We have to keep working towards that medium of understanding that we have a bigger role in that diversity plight. And so I applaud the colleges, and many of which are in the Midwest, that are now challenging themselves to hire chief diversity officers, and to do the great work behind what that means for an institution, and what that means for how we grow as a society.
Something that comes to mind for me is that I need my white counterparts to see this as a white issue that needs to be solved, not just a Black issue that needs to be empathized with. That there needs to be a higher level of action involved in solving the core issue, instead of just the empathy of, I feel so bad, and here are these surface level things that we can say, or institution can say, a message that we can put out. That doesn't do anything, that doesn't educate anybody, that doesn't move forward with any kind of action. And I think that's kind of where we're stuck a lot of the time, is there's nice words that are said, but there's not anything behind it. But we need our white counterparts, if we're talking about color specifically, to show up and see this as their issue as much as they feel like it's our issue. If that makes sense.
And to add further, even in my practice over, this last, 6 months, over this pandemic time, I have several white clients who came in and said, I'm at odds with my family right now because I realized I grew up in a racist household. And it wasn't until these events that have happened that I've been able to reflect and say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't right. So there are people that have not spoken to their parents in months, or spoken to their siblings in months, based upon their views and things that have came about during this time period. So counseling people with what their initial reason for starting sessions with me are now morphed into, how do I, bring forth myself into my family dynamic again, or even feel comfortable coming around during the holidays when certain topics come about, or when certain discussions start, or when certain comments are made. They're feeling a little uneasy because they realize that they have been a part of or taken part in some of the things that we're discussing here today, and it's no longer okay with them. And that has been a tremendous struggle for people, and also it has challenged me as a therapist to not only find a way for them to communicate with people who have their mind set at 60 and 70 years old, but also to let people know that it's okay to separate yourself from ignorance, even if it's your family.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So I'm going to move on to the next question, and I'm going to start with you, Katie, on this question. And it was something you brought up, so I think it's a good question to start with you on. There is a lack of racial trauma training in diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So I think all of you have kind of talked about the fact that there has been an increase in diversity, equity, inclusion work, especially over the last year and so. How do you acknowledge this important intersection in your work?
So I currently work for myself. I have my private practice that I opened, and right now it's just me. So I focus my own training on programs that include racial trauma in the trainings that they do, so that I'm staying up on current research and I'm staying up on things that matter. And so I always keep this in mind as well when I'm working with clients and helping explore things like diagnosis, like keeping in mind racial trauma as it pertains to diagnosis in my medical framework, so to speak. Because I think oftentimes racial trauma, identity and culture kind of get overlooked when we're considering things like diagnosis or treatment planning. And so keeping that in mind as I work with my clients and as I have that collaboration with them. But as I move forward through the rest of this year, I'm in the process of thinking about starting to bring on some employees into my practice. And so I already know that this will be a foundation and a required training for all people who work with me to have racial trauma training, racial competency trainings, so that the work that we're bringing to our clients and doing with our clients are with that framework.
And if I could jump in here, I think for me, the work is around, so the personal work that we do in our meetings and in our interaction, I call that the personal work, right? That's the day-to-day work of working with your colleagues and helping them shape their ideas around diversity and how do we move past where we are. But in the work that I do, particularly, I am a dean of adult education at one of the colleges that's a part of a very big system here in the Midwest. And so for me, I like to move it in a different direction, right? So I spend time thinking about our entire process of college for students. So just looking at our marketing, at our communication with students, just looking at processes like their registration or retention. In my mind, I have a responsibility as an administrator to look at every sector of that student life experience and to figure out what is happening at that particular juncture that could be more reflective of Black America. And so when we even think about our registration process, when we even think about especially retention, that's a big one. I'm on a lot of retention committees, have served a lot with HLC and with different committee and our accrediting bodies that really look at the work we do as colleges. And so for me, I'm at the table very often advocating for, almost demanding in many cases, that these changes be made to our system because so many hidden there's so many hidden things that occur that to me speaks to the experience of white people that makes it easier for them to matriculate through these processes. So it's my job, it's my personal commitment to dissect each of those sectors to figure out, hey, is there some way at this particular juncture of a student life experience that is a barrier for the traditional Black person? And I say traditional in a sense that even within Black culture, not one situation defines every Black student, right? So we still want to be, diverse in our thinking about who we're serving. And so it's my personal responsibility as an administrator to take a look at every sector of that process and to challenge the individuals that it's in their wheelhouse to make policy, to make procedures, to make processes, to make sure that they're reflective of a larger group of people. And so that's the work I do. And I think that it's important work that I do. But I don't think that it's fair that I have to make that choice. I think that colleges have to be charged with doing that systemically, because this is not a person by person, a one-off situation. There has to be some systematic process that we're looking at the student life experience from beginning to end, even through how we get them into grad school and even how we attract them as employees later. It's like if we don't take that time to look at those pieces and to really work with the individuals who inform policy, who inform decisions that make or break a student, if we don't charge institutions with doing that, I think we're not doing our jobs as professionals who have arrived, so to speak, in our communities. And so I have been very instrumental in making sure that certain things occur. For example, at an institution I work at, one of our registration processes involves a lot of extra things that, to me, why? And so I challenge my colleagues all the time, like, if we see that if the data shows that we're losing our Black students at step 6, what is happening in step 6 that has to happen? And when you challenge people to think about why, you put them in a position to have to evaluate how these things came about, because when things are systemic, people can't see it as easy. So when you work through that process of dialogues and emails and conversations, both formal and informal, and help people to look at those processes and develop those that are more apt to attract and to retain and to help graduate our students of color, I feel very good, and I can sleep at night feeling like I've had some impact on that. And that doesn't just come from my personal experience, it also comes from my experience as a student, my experience as a mother with children that are getting through these systems. So I really appreciate that diverse perspective and how it really can shape how successful communities are if they have people in place that are as charged with or feel as responsible as I do to be sure that it's, it involves the Black experience.
If I can just jump off of that real quick. It's my responsibility as a business owner to make sure that my policies and my procedures are there to support the needs of my clients and make the access to my services as smooth and as easy as possible. So, as you were talking about examining where are we losing Black students in the onboarding process to college, that's something that I've continued to reflect on too. Where am I losing interest, or where are my clients hitting barriers in the intake process or throughout the process, so that I can start examining other policies or procedures that I'm following that are creating barriers within this community. And so that's absolutely part of my responsibility and something that I take really seriously. Sorry, Shannon, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. I appreciate it. I think for myself, because of, it's just me and my private practice. So I know that the things that I have learned all through my schooling and education and techniques, they have all been based upon the white experience. All of the philosophers and the educators that have taught these different studies and techniques and case studies that we've had to go over in our trainings have been based upon one experience and one experience only. And we did what we need to do to graduate and get to the levels we needed to get to. But when you're able to incorporate your culture and your background into what you do, is how I am changing the experience for my clients that I work with. I also encourage parents and families that I work with that are having kids that are struggling in their schools, to educate themselves and push back on these diagnoses that they're being placed upon them. There are a lot of things that our children do that are different than other cultures, and it's not considered problematic in our particular culture, but it's problematic to others. And having them say, hey, no, I don't agree with this, and I'm going to seek out additional information, or I'm going to seek out someone above you. I'm not going to just accept this as law that you're saying this about my child or about my family member. So pushing back and educating yourself and not taking things as face value is what I tell people. But also in my own interventions, I'm also keeping in mind the clientele that I'm dealing with, and knowing that what I've learned most likely will not apply to this child, to this family, to this individual.
Thank you. I heard a couple things that sparked some thoughts in my own head. I think I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the fact that you guys are all from, I apologize, my friends here, because you're not all guys, my friends here, are all from different sectors. And so before we move on to the last question, I would just, because like I said in the beginning, I don't take my responsibility lightly to make sure that I'm leaving the space where I'm welcoming you in, and I'm not just creating a space that I'm making you fit into. If there's any questions you have for each other in terms of what you heard regarding each other's different sectors.
I think that I was happy to learn today about Shannon's work with athletes. I have very little to none experience with athletes. I have two sons, both of which played no sport well. And I tried to get them to play sports. I just thought that's what guys do. They're not sport kids. And even throughout my own experience in both college and otherwise, I've just never been a sports person. And I only look at sports when I just want to taunt people and have good food, right? So I'm not a sports person. I like parties, though. I throw an awesome Super Bowl party, with the exception of this year. But nevertheless, when I heard you speak today, Shannon, about that sector of athletes, I thought long and hard about, some of the great work that some of our NBA players and different folks have done. But of course, because I work at a college, I began to think about our student athletes at the college level. And just thinking about their experience too. I was in a position to do I was at some place where there were some athletes, and they were having some kind of celebratory thing. I don't know. They had maybe won something, I guess. I think they didn't win, but they were just trying to keep them feeling good about it, right? So they didn't win whatever they were supposed to win. I'm assuming the coach was probably trying to do some good sport type things. And I remember those students making references to some of the Black and white issues. I remember this particular group that was, of course, a lot of Black people and minorities, or whatever the new word is this month. But nevertheless, I remember them feeling like they had lost because the other team was white. And I remember feeling the charge that I needed to get in there, just because my master's is in social work and I'm not a counselor at all. I love people that can listen to people. I like to talk, not a listener at all. So that couldn't be the field I got into. And I learned that quickly and was able to pivot. But nevertheless, I remember being charged or feeling the responsibility to talk to this group. And I remember talking to them and explaining why they made those statements. Oftentimes, students can make a statement or have a feeling, but they don't have a place to pose that. And so I remember talking to these athletes and helping them to understand that when they made the reference to the fact that the other team won because they were white, I wanted to make sure they understood what that meant, not just that they're white, we're Black, we're inferior, we lost. So I wanted to shape for them what might be some of the reasons this team had access to resources. Is it possible that because many of their parents might, because I don't want to say all, some of their parents might be of that economic status where they've been practicing maybe perhaps since they were 4 and 5. They had the kids in Little League, they had things of that sort. Perhaps this other group with that I was with, perhaps that wasn't their experience. You might have 10 or 15 years already experience in this particular thing. Could it also be that participation seemed to be greater on their side, right? Does that have any impact on a student's ability to win the game? Is, how much support do they get from family? And what does family look like for a lot of folks in these community, where a lot of our students in this particular group, I need to keep framing that, a lot of them come from single parent households, right? And so there's a lot of pieces that come with that. But I felt really good about working with these athletes, helping them to frame how they felt that they lost to this more in a systematic way, more in a more global sociological understanding of why they were perhaps in a position to not win, as opposed to just saying they're white and for them to believe, and by some default then, that Black was some kind of way inferior. So for your work, Shannon, is that something that is a part of some of the work you do? Is that some of the types of conversations or dialogue you've had to have?
That's an interesting concept because, I can say that I have been kind of blinded by some of the things that I noticed later on. So, for example, in high school, practice was at a certain time. And I don't recall a time that practice was not able to happen because we didn't have enough players or we didn't have enough of our team there. There are youth that can't get to practice because, mom has to work until 5:30, practice starts at 5 o'clock and there's only one car, or she has to, do a lot of other things and you may not be able to get a ride. So that contributes to a team structure. If you don't have all of your players there at certain times, you can't practice the same way. You can't prepare the same way. So when you show up on Saturday or Sunday for a game, you're ill prepared because you didn't even have most of your team based upon their availability, whether it's rides or even something as simple as, we'll have expect our youth or expect our athletes to perform at a certain level, and they've had one meal if that. And that happens in our community far more than others. So the ability to have higher level training and extra practice, is not always available for our community, but it is available to theirs. And when you have that disparity, that causes a change in outcomes because you have that accessibility where another segment of population does not. So therefore, that also breeds a different type of hunger as well. So when you see someone get to, a level of professional attainment, well, they've had so many different types of struggles or had to get rides or had to walk to practice to where they're excelling at a level greater than their counterparts because they've had those disparities at a young age. So, when people make comments on even why this person no longer has money and they had this $1 million contract, multi-million-dollar contract over a span of years. Well, again, we can go back to the ground floor that there are certain levels of education and certain types of resources that were not afforded to this individual as they were coming up to where now they are afforded all of these luxuries and all of these opportunities, and they have not been properly coached or educated on how to maintain these things. So, even statements of, calling athletes dumb, and foolish. Well, you have no idea what their struggle has been to get to that point, to allow them to not make the same type of decisions as other people who have had those opportunities and experiences have had. So that's a great question, Tasha.
Any other thoughts or questions for each other?
Yeah, I actually had a question for Katie. Katie, I know that a lot of times, from what I feel I understand about, and I have to always preface that because, never do we want to believe that we're the expert in all things, right? So please challenge me to language that's different if possible. But I know that a lot of African American people, just within my circles, are anti-counseling or getting help. Sometimes it's, there's a lot of reasons behind that. Not everybody makes the same decision for the same reason. So some of it is access, some of it is insurance, some of it is time. Like when you're already poor and trying to meet the demands of a family, you don't need something else that you can't get to. Yeah. And I'm sure there's other reasons too. Sometimes it could be that they don't feel they're going to be talking to somebody that looks like them. Or they've been in so many positions where they've had to be on the receiving end of just what another person is telling them they need to do that's not of color. They just don't want to add to that experience any more than they have to, right? Because all their teachers are white, their dentists are white, their doctors are white. So what, if any, what do you see as some of the ways that you've been able to work against that myth or to help encourage individuals in the African American community to take advantage of this very useful process of counseling with mental health professionals?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For me, I try to remove barriers as much as I can, and I think like in Appleton, in the Fox Valley, the community is relatively small, so word travels quickly when something works, and then everybody seems to know about it. And so I try to, like I said, remove barriers in my intake process and my processes for making services accessible. So if childcare is an issue, bring your children. I'm okay with that. if insurance is an issue, let's talk about that. I offer sliding fee scales. I want to work with my clients and make my services accessible for them. And just know that they're safe when they come to me, that I don't have all the answers. I will say that I don't have all the answers, and it's not my job to tell anybody, white, black, or otherwise, what to do. It's my job is to help them figure out what they need to do, because they know that, they have that knowledge. It's not I who has that. So I think it comes down to removing as many barriers. And for me, word of mouth has created a community and a safety net for my clients. So that's kind of how it's worked in my world, but yeah.
All right, so let's move into the last question. And I'll let whoever wants to go first. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. Okay. How can someone support and understand the experience of Black trauma? So how can someone understand and experience, support and understand the experience of Black trauma without making it seem like they're profiting off of it or using trauma in a performative way? So how can you understand it and support it? Especially if you're an ally, but everyone on the call kind of works in different sectors. How do we support each other's work? And how do we understand that experience isn't going to be monolithic for all Black individuals, but that there's some form of trauma there, especially over the last year with everything that has happened around just racial reckoning, especially for Black people and through the Black Lives Matters movement. So how do you support that, understand it, but not profit off of it?
Well, I'll say this from my standpoint. I do a lot of scenario work with people who have difficulty in understanding. And generally, when you can put someone in someone else's shoes by putting or inserting themselves in that situation that happened, or a family member, their jaws drop, and then they have the desire to look at a situation a little bit differently. If it's your sister that's, on the ground, or if it's your grandmother that's shoved against the wall, then that makes that experience a little bit more unified with all of us, because it is always easier to project when you're not in direct proximity to a certain group of people. So if all you see on television for a certain demographic of people is when you're watching Maury, or when you're watching, certain types of television shows, that's going to formulate your experience. So, being more willing to listen, like I said earlier, instead of responding in defense. And it just comes with a compassionate heart that people have to develop, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings trying to get this thing right. And when we take ourselves and our emotion out of a situation because of our own familiarity and look at how it's affecting someone else, I think that's going to be a way to bridge the gap and assist in this movement of just understanding and acceptance of people. And if we can kind of focus on that, I think the progression that we're hoping for can come a little bit quicker than it has been for so many years.
I think it's important to, do your own research and do your own work, facing your own privilege. And that's not easy work to do, but to face your own privilege and do your own research helps that listening process, I think, right? To listen to understand, not listen to respond. So I think just starting there is helpful.
And if I could add, I think one of the things I picked up on, as it relates to this question, was I think removing the emotion helps, right? I think when we think of things as, civil rights or things of that nature, there's an emotional side to that, right? We think about people and riots and people's emotional trauma. I like to do things from a different perspective. I think you have to come to the fight with a weapon. So for me, I like to remove the emotion, and I like to use data. When I'm working with different groups of people and making some assertion about how we can do things different. I don't come from the emotional standpoint. It benefits no one for me to talk about Black America in the sense of that there's some inferiority there, and I'm asking you to bend the rules to help these people. That's not what I come to the table to say. I tend to frame things in a way to come to the table to say, hey, when we look at this progression of students, we're losing 17% of them. So let's think about what's happening in the life of those 17% of students. And to get people to not look at a group of people as having all these deficiencies, but looking at a system that's deficient in attracting these students. So I charge others with that responsibility to help break down that systemic way of how we look at things and how we compare groups and people. And so sometimes I try and do things from a data standpoint. I try and do things that's not all about the touchy-feely parts of things. And I learn to advocate not just for Black America, I learn to advocate for other sectors. And in that way, I think my message comes off a little more diverse. And it's in itself, like I don't feel that I'm not going to be responsible for Black History Month. That's all about History Month. It happens 1 month out of the year, and I enjoy the wonderful presentations that we do all around the world. I'm very respectful of it. I'm very thankful for it. In that same way, it's not my responsibility, or it's not Black people's responsibility to say, here's our month to shine. There's a whole year that we are responsible. Every person is responsible for making sure that history is built into the history that because every student gets access to that. And so that's just one example. But for me, I'm more about data, what it means, and I try and take the emotion out of things so that when people talk to me, they don't feel, or when they're interacting, or if I'm serving on a committee or chairing a committee, I don't want them to feel that they're going to have to hear a lot about, what we've done to Black people in some way, have to admit they're wrong. That's not what I'm there for, because at the end of the day, they have to deal with their own creator about the choices they've made during their life. But while I'm here in any capacity that I'm working, I do have a responsibility to charge people with thinking about things. And if data is the way to have that conversation more openly, and if I can, one meeting at a time, get someone to peel back those layers of understanding how those systems negatively impact groups of people, then I've done my work. And so I just think we have to remove the emotion out of things. This is not about a person that got killed. This is about an entire group of people that have been ostracized and oppressed, and all the terrible things that have happened. It can't be fixed by somebody just dropping a tear at a Black History show. It just can't. So for me, I just think about doing things more systemically and removing the emotion and talking about things from an unemotional standpoint has been very beneficial for the work that I do.
Before we move on to open questions, are there any other cross comments amongst our panelists or thoughts you'd like to share? This is your space. Before we invite other people into it, I want to honor that. Okay, then we will open it up for the last 20 minutes here to questions. So we will now remove the block on the chat. And if you have a question, please put the question in the chat, and I will pick from the questions in the chat and moderate them. Or if you'd like to also raise your hand, I am okay with that too. So Avian, go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say it's not letting me unmute my mic. I'm so sorry. Thank you all for being here. I really, really appreciate it. So my first question is to Lautauscha. So you were mentioning how you basically have been within your position demanding change throughout the system when it comes to higher education. So they always tell us at UW Oshkosh, if we want to see change, that the students have to be the ones to push forward. So I guess, do you have a group of students that is willing to go on the ride with you and support you for the things that you are trying to push for? And if not, do you think that that might push things a little bit faster?
That's a great question. I do have value in obviously working with students as being a part of that dialogue. I think the careful part you have to consider, though, is that you have to help educate the students, right? A lot of times students have thoughts and feelings. And I believe that when I was a student, I did things from the emotional side, right? And so when students are involved, one of the best features of working with students is to help educate them so they can become advocates for themselves in a meaningful way. So I think that some of the work we do with student groups and helping them to language things better, it gives them more power than just arriving to a discussion emotional about things. And so there's space for emotion, there's space to say we don't like this or we don't like that, but helping people learn to advocate for themselves is really important. And I completely agree that when you bring students into that situation, it helps. In fact, I tend to, when I'm advocating for a change or demanding a change, in some ways, I tend to already have a few student stories. I call them by name. So if I'm in a meeting, I don't just say Black students, I make reference to their names. So for example, I'll say Paul Sutton, that's not a real person, I don't think, or John Doe or whoever. So I will use names to put a situation or an experience into the room. And so I think that it's important to involve students. I think it's a way you help educate the different student groups on how to advocate and how to hold a political venue, and how do you speak for yourself, and how to do things in a way that brings about the real change that they need, as opposed to letting it rest with emotion. So absolutely, students should be involved. And I do think when students get involved, it does bring a bigger message, particularly at like a university level. Currently, I'm not at the university level. I work at a community college. But even at the university level, I think there's more infrastructure in place for students to have a voice. And so at that level, particularly, there are real need to make sure that students are involved in that process and that they're educated on how to successfully plead their case, and how to be real smart and be real wise about what they're doing and how they move and interact in those circles. Because that's what they're supposed to learn at college anyway. That's the whole college experience, is learning how to articulate an idea to other people in a persuasive way. And so if they're not doing anything else, they're learning some of those skills as well. Thank you.
Any other thoughts from the panelists on Avian's question? I know she geared it towards Tasha.
I just want to say, just kind of to reiterate that I worked at two universities, and working with students was crucial for starting to bring about that change and to have student voices show up in that space. And what I found too is that students tend to listen to students more than they listen to me or listen to people who are in authority roles. And so if we can teach students how to advocate for themselves and to advocate for one another in appropriate ways, I think that's where that change starts to come from the student level. So I think student involvement is probably one of the most important pieces.
I saw you on mic, Shannon.
Everything was perfectly said. I don't have anything to add.
I agree. Next question in the chat here. How do we best support the helpers who are called to help others through trauma, i.e. staff who are resources for students who may be experiencing their own trauma?
I would say, for example, anyone that has to address a group of any sort, I think a resource is Psychology Today. And that's how a lot of my clients find me. Read through some profiles. You might be able to find people who have expertise in certain areas and they are willing to answer questions for you, or even to be brought in to provide information to you or to your staff or whatever the case may be. Being willing to do that legwork and understanding that you may not have the answers, or you have nowhere or no clue to where to start, is the first step in researching and getting the qualified individuals to provide that the information or that counsel to you, and just be willing to have an open mind to acknowledge what you don't know, and then start there. That would be, my advice on any situation when it comes to these topics. There's a lot of people who are put in positions and are, battling their own ego and not wanting to acknowledge that they're not as versed as they think they are, just because they watched a couple of videos or watched a couple of, town hall meetings on TV after some type of civil situation. That's not enough, and you have to find yourself and place yourself around individuals who have done this and do this on a consistent and daily basis.
Other thoughts?
I think that when I think of So I've worked with a diverse group of folks, diverse in the sense of various roles and responsibilities and titles. And when I think of the different roles, I know that those people are also in the homes of people they're trying to protect and advocate for. And so when I think of things like mental health days, I think for me as an administrator, I get a chance to do some really innovative things, right? So I haven't mentioned where I work, so I can safely say there's times where I just feel like it's been a rough week. It's been a rough registration period. I can decide that this is enough for us. We're wrapping it up on a Thursday. We're wrapping it up at 12 o'clock. Folks just need to go home. There's things that have happened, and even while people are at work, where maybe institutions haven't taken charge yet to give direction on how to let people go home for the day, or they're stuck in the what to do. So I'm never stuck. For me, something happened bad today. We've not had a chance to digest it. I don't know what it means for me, what it means for you. There's nothing we're doing here today that can't wait till tomorrow. So for me, I'm very thoughtful about how trauma affects all of us, even our counterparts. I am very thoughtful of how, it could be making them feel uncomfortable, or how things could be coming off to other people. So I think that, when you think of mental health of people that are responsible for other people's mental health, they still have the same need. We're all still built and born the same way. All the differences that come about are after we're here. So we're all born the same way. And so for me, I think about how people could be feeling very often and trying to make way. In my role, I can do things as give people days off. I can tell people, let's wrap up this day. I can tell people we're not doing that. We're not doing this. We're letting this go. I can break the rules a little bit. If I know something that I just know in my heart and it's not moving fast enough, we're doing it. So I have found very creative ways, and I've been challenged, and I've had to be talked to a couple of times. I don't imagine it's going to stop, but I'm going to do what I need to do for when I need to do it.
Anybody else had to be talked to a couple times? Next question in the chat here. Thank you to Thank you to the panelists for sharing at such deep level. How do you personally self-care, and your suggestions for self-healing when it's very, very emotionally traumatic? The anger has exploded and words that should not have been said were said. So when you do something that you have to get a talking to because maybe your emotions just went over, can't take back what you said. So what does self-care look like for you?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Was somebody else going? Oh, I think self-care is important. I can't be Black at a certain time of day and not the other time, right? But you know what, for me, even though I am a talker, I exercise silence. Sometimes I'm so furious that I can't say a word because I can't formulate it in a way that is acceptable in whatever situation I'm in. So part of the strength in being Black is knowing when to talk and when not to. And I make that choice for myself. And so for me, there's times, especially when things are sensationalized, especially when there's things that's already been said in circles that I'm somewhat offended by, I can decide to fight the battle with every person I know. I know a lot of people. I can use social media like everybody else to say something, but I promise you, there's not a situation where if I'm feeling emotional about it, that I don't make the decision. I think fast. Is this a time I'm going to say something or not? And so for me, I use silence at a time when I can't speak. I just can't. And that speaks volumes. Like, people know if Lautauscha is quiet, something's happening, right? So I get those phone calls later, or I get an email or even a text while I'm sitting there. Everybody is around the table texting me like, what's going on? You didn't say anything. Like, I can't. So there's times that, and I think work has its place because I have to be Black everywhere. So if for the 9 hours or 8 or 7, depends on how warm it is outside or whatever my work day looks like, when it's over, I take care of myself. I'm known to be gone Thursday through Tuesday. I use a couple of days. I have to take care of myself. I got to be the best me. So if that means some travel and some Mai Tais or whatever that looks like, trust me, I find time for me. And everybody should, because whatever work you're doing, if anything happened to us, they post our jobs and send some flowers and have some nice things to say. But, the work still goes on. So we have to take care of ourselves, and that has to be a priority. And Mai Tais are great. I just said that.
I agree. Mai Tais are great. Yeah, for me, I mean, self-care is crucial. It's not an option. I think a lot of times we think about self-care or taking care as an optional thing. I'll get to it when I get to it. And for me, it's a priority. It has to be. Otherwise, I don't survive. I don't survive my day. I can't show up for the people that I need to show up for. And I can't show up for myself, which just is not acceptable. So I too have figured out when to be quiet, that I don't have to fight every fight or every injustice that I see, or that I experience, that sometimes it's just not worth my energy and my time. And I've learned to surround myself with people who get me, who I feel like get it, and who know when I just need someone to sit with me and someone to let me be quiet, and not have the answers. So that's really crucial part of how I take care of me. And I have figured out, like, I talk and I listen all day. That's part of my job as a counselor. And so when I'm done with that during the day, I have to have a period where I'm not listening to others. I'm not supporting. I'm not stepping into that role. And I can listen to what I need. So the end of my day usually looks like some self-care time for me, some reflection time for me. And without it, I'm just not a very healthy version of myself. And I've learned to turn the news off, to not check the news, to not check the next big thing that's happened, to disconnect a little bit when I need to. And I think that's perfectly healthy.
I'll say for myself, it's very difficult to temper your thoughts and emotions as a Black male. And also, I'm 6'6", and we already get labeled when we voice our opinion or voice a displeasure that we're angry. And that is so far from the truth. I'm direct and I say what I mean, and that doesn't mean that I'm overbearing or unwilling to listen. So understanding yourself and not apologizing for your personality is one thing that I've learned. And in situations that have a heightened emotional undertone, stick to the facts. When you hit people with facts about situations, it just minimizes the emotion because we can just always go back to the numbers and situations that have occurred. I also, normalize just leaving the room. Sometimes when you remove yourself, it lets people know that something has been said or stated that has been unnerving or inappropriate. And that's a statement in itself. And, I've become a master at pulling people to the side. So if there has been something that has been said or that has been deemed disrespectful, to avoid that, you know, um, that possibility of someone taking something that you say the wrong way, pulling that individual aside and letting them know what they are saying or their thought process about a situation has been hurtful or has been disturbing. And to just, go back to, what Katie said, I always implore people to unplug, remove themselves from this cycle of having to check into what's going on social media or on Facebook or in the news or on the press. Being okay to just remove yourself from that spin cycle of just negativity and input and opinions and ideas does wonders for me. So I watch a lot of ESPN, I watch a lot of sports, listen to music, and I work out, and it keeps me focused to do what I do every day.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoughtful responses. Right now we're putting, as we have just a couple minutes left, an evaluation of today's panel in the chats. Before we go, we have 1 minute. I want to make sure that I thank you again for taking the emotional energy it does to talk about your own trauma or Black trauma. And at UW Oshkosh today, we appreciate your time and your thoughtful responses. And I can say for myself, I learned a lot. And I hope that you guys also learned a lot from each other. So thank you.